So good afternoon or good morning for Alexey, everybody. And for those who don't know me, my name is Biserka Gajdarska, and together with my friend and colleague, Dr. Agatha Greingruber from the Free University in Berlin, we have the pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of the Our Archaeology in Action online series devoted to the North Pontic region. This series was initiated by the president of ARWA, which I saw that is in the audience, Professor Mark Ebau, and organized by myself and Agatha. For those unfamiliar with ARWA, this is an abbreviation that stands for the International Association for Archaeological Research in Western and Central Asia. And if you want to know more about this organization, you're warmly invited to have a look at our website. You all know that North Pontic area is not exactly in West and Central Asia, but as of last year, the area covered by ARWA extended its western borders to include the Eastern Balkans and the Black Sea. As all of the ARWA Archaeology in Action lecture series, there will be 8 online series that, following the live presentation as what we have now, will be available on the ARWA YouTube platform, links to which you'll be able to find again on our website. The schedule for this and other ARWA series can also be found at our website. After this initial general introduction, it is a pleasure and honor to introduce our first speaker, Professor Alexey Nikitin from the Grand Valley State University in the USA. Alexey was born in Kyiv, in the family of a famous Ukrainian biotechnologist and physicist, Gennady Nikitin. Alexey's mother was a nurse assistant to the Ukrainian pioneer heart surgeon, Mykola Mosov. Alexey's first encounter with archaeology was at the age of 7, when he befriended archaeologists who excavated the antique site of Olvia in South Ukraine, when Alexey's family vacationed nearby. Alexey graduated from the National University of Kyiv in 1992 with a first Master's of Science degree in biology ever awarded in the university. In the fall of 1992, Alexey started a PhD program in Bowling Green State University in Ohio, from which he graduated with a PhD in population genetics in 1997. Alexey's first big publication on the role of mobile genetic elements in the process of aging was published in the same year. Alexey was formally introduced to archaeology in 2005, and I think that's exactly 2006 when I met him for the first time in Krakow, when he joined a survey excavation in the Tripili site of Vertebra Cave. In 2010, Alexey joined by prominent Ukrainian archaeologist and radiocarbon specialist, published his first genetic analysis of the Tripili culture population. Currently, Alexey is a professor of biology in the Grand Valley State University, and his main research interests are in phylogeography, human evolution, human migrations, and molecular archaeology. He has a long list of publications covering those interests, many of which concern his homeland, as is the topic of what he's going to talk about today, entitled Interpreting Genetic Ancestry of the Builders of the First Kurgans in the North Pontic Steppe. Alexey.
Thank you, Biserka, for this wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm gonna have to confess, when I first agreed to give this talk several months ago, I was absolutely certain that by the time this talk takes place, the material that I'm going to discuss today is going to be published. However, nothing works perfectly in this world. And at the moment, this study, the big study of which my talk is a little part of, a big study dedicated to the deciphering the origins, genetic origins of the Yamna culture. This study is still being processed. Essentially, there's a lot of information that needed to be taken into account, and it's not always up to us in terms of how expedient the dissemination process takes place. The Russian aggression in Ukraine certainly was a major factor that slowed things down, because this project is an international project and it involves scientists, archaeologists, and geneticists from all over Southeast Europe, including Ukraine and Russia. But I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we will be able to show this project in its entirety. So treat this presentation as a preview, as a movie trailer for an exciting feature that's gonna be released later in the year. So I'm going to take you back 6,500 years ago to the time when the late Stone Age in Europe was coming to a close, and the New Age, the age of metal, started to develop. The area of well, around the Black Sea, the Pontic area, as we refer to it, was the epicenter of the metallurgic development. And I'm going to focus on this area, well, since the presentation is about the northern and western portion of the Black Sea. So as far as metallurgy goes, in this area, the Balkan Carpathian part was becoming a center of metallurgic activity. The pyrometallurgy process, as we refer to, the smelting of copper and metal in general, it started around 5,000 BC, and it's connected to the Vinca culture, and that's I put the year 5,000 as the beginning of this time period called the Eneolithic, or the Copper Age, just to acknowledge that this is so the first time we see pyrometallurgy taking place in the Balkan Carpathian area was around that time. But really, the whole metal processing took off around 4,700 BCE, before Common Era. And it involved metallurgic and salt-producing centers of the West Balkans, such as Varna and Thrace and other parts of that zone, the Black Sea area. And it also started to attract customers, let's call them customers at this point, from faraway places. As we all know, the Khvalynsk group participated in the what we call Circumpontic trade network that was going on for about 500 years, from 4,700 to about 4,200 BCE, and involved the groups of the steppe herders. We call them herders. I'm not sure if they were herders in reality. We don't know much about the economic status, but that's just the term that stuck. Western steppe herders, WSH. At least this is how we define the genetic ancestry that they display. And they shared this ancestry with the inhabitants, Eneolithic and then early Bronze Age inhabitants of the northern part of the Black Sea, the North Pontic area. Their counterparts in the North Pontic are known as Sredny Stog, or Sredny Stig, if we use Ukrainian transliteration, Sredny Stig, that is. And it's the same ancestry that is displayed by their successors, the Yamna culture, in the early Bronze Age. Catacomb culture and those that follow also have various percentages of that ancestry. And as we all know, this ancestry also got into Europe in the early Bronze Age and replaced somewhere to the tune of from 30 to 75% of the old European gene pool by the Middle Bronze Age. So again, the exact function of the steppe groups in this trade network is not entirely well understood. But what is understood is that they did play an active role in this exchange or trade, and it's evidenced by some of the spectacular burials that they left behind in the Northwest and the West Pontic. And even though you think about just how far away Smolensk is from Varna, it's near 2,500 kilometers. And just to think, the map that I show here on this slide comes from a book. It's a pamphlet, really. The Lost World of Old Europe, put together by David Anthony for the exhibit that took place in 2010 in New York. And so there's this dashed line that goes from Northwest Pontic all the way to the Volga and the Ural footsteps, and it goes over land. And so if you walk this distance from Varna to Smolensk, it would take you quite some time, but you'll be able to do it in 30 days. So if there's nothing that stops you on the way. So even though the distances are dramatic on the map, these are doable in a human lifetime to go back and forth several times. I think, even though we don't have much evidence to that most of this travel was taking place over water. The distribution of Sredny Stig, or Suvorova, part of Sredny Stig burials in West Pontic, is always linked to riverways. So it is quite conceivable that all of this travel, all of this movement between Middle Volga and the West Pontic took place over water. But that's not what the focus of my presentation. By about 4200 BCE, things started to change in this intense trade. A transition period, otherwise known as hiatus, took place between about 4200 and 3900 BCE. These were, as Jim Mallory put it, the dark ages of prehistory. Know very little about what was going on at this time period, and what we do know suggests that the area around the Black Sea, the northern and western part of the Black Sea, experienced a climatic change, a climatic shift. David Anthony studied climate in that time period, and he found that the 300 years of this transition period that were marked by droughts, by overall general weather instability, and on top of all that, there was also the fluctuation of the Black Sea. By the year 4000 BCE, the level of the Black Sea in the west part of the Pontic area was about 5 meters higher than it is today. And so what we see during this time is the disappearance of these cultural and metallurgic and salt mining centers in Bulgaria, for example, and parts of Romania, and the shift of this activity further northwest. So the Suvorova culture is, well, part of this process, perhaps. We don't know for sure. There is, well, it's a long-standing supposition proposed by Maria Gimbutas and scholars before her, that the Suvorova branch of Sredny Stig had something to do with the disappearance of these West Pontic sites. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. But the center of activity shifted to the Usatova culture in the Northwest Pontic, both metallurgy and salt mining. And that Usatova transformation started the post-transition period of time in the history of the Black Sea, which lasted till about 3300 BCE. And we see a great variety of cultures coming up all over the area. They represent different aspects of life of people at that time, from metalworking to trade. A lot of travel is evidenced during this time, helped by the presence or existence by that time of wheeled wagons. We see regular trade routes re-emerging between the west and the east, now moving towards the Caucasus Mountains area, and the pre-Maykop and Maykop culture developing metallurgic skills as a counterpart to what was going on in the West Pontic. And so all this diversity of cultures and lifestyles started to disintegrate again around, well, we just talked about this with Svetlana Ivanova just the other day, about the timing of this. Probably, as Rasamakin suggested some time ago, about 3,400 BCE is where we see this disintegration of individual local cultural aspects, as evidenced by changes in burial traditions. And this is an archaeological thing. I'm a geneticist. I'm interested enough to understand most of it, but the details are still not very well understood by me. So I'm gonna leave it up to the archaeologists to discuss exactly what the evidence is for this disintegration. But shortly after, this cultural tapestry of the Circumpontic area, the northern and the western part, was replaced by a homogeneous culture known as the Yamna. And so what the Yamna is characterized by, what it is known by most, is their burial traditions, kurgans. Yamna didn't leave much of a material culture behind. There's a lot, obviously, pottery and other objects that characterize the Yamna, but kurgans appear to be the hallmark of their presence in the steppe and beyond. But the thing is, it wasn't the Yamna who came up with the first kurgans in the area. First kurgans started to appear in the Circumpontic area, the north and northwest Pontic, right after the transition period. So 40, maybe even at the end of the transition period, 4,000, 3,900 BCE. And so the question is that I'm interested in, one of the many, but one of the most interesting at this point is whether there is a genetic link between the first builders of kurgans in the steppe and the successors of the early Bronze Age, the Yamna culture. I'm going to focus on three groups here where we see the first kurgans that they're associated with first kurgans in the area. The Suvorova group, the post-Suvorova, post-Tseretny group that's after the transition period, and the Usatova culture. And when it comes to Suvorova, this is not exactly shared by all archaeologists, as far as I understand it, that Suvorova built the kurgans that are associated with the burials. It is most likely that kurgans were later addition to the ground cemeteries produced by Suvorova people. But the jury is still out, and I'm including Suvorova in this discussion, and also because it's a fascinating culture to me. It's a fascinating culture, not only in the cultural aspect, but also in the genetic aspect. So I will tell you about this shortly. I'm showing here several sites of Suvorova culture. Let me get a point. One the toponymic Suvorova in Ukraine, the Kurgan site in Moldova, as well as two other sites, the Sia Murzului in Romania and Csongrád in Hungary. All these are associated with Suvorova one way or another. We have DNA from 3 out of 4. We don't have DNA from Suvorova yet. Hopefully, we'll get it at some point. Suvorova and Kurgan sites have kurgans on top of the Suvorova necropole, but the Sia and Csongrád don't. These are ground cemeteries. But again, I'm bringing them into the discussion because there's some fascinating things about the genetics that I think it's time we all hear about. The Sia genetics was published in the preprint already, and the other two are still in the process. The post-Suvorova group of steppe inhabitants is referred to by many archaeologists as the Katarzyna type, named after the main burial in one of the two kurgans in the Katarzyna, at the Katarzyna site in the Odessa region. So I'm going to talk about both of those kurgans and about some of the dates, new dates that were recently produced, and obviously the genetics. There's another kurgan just north of Katarzyna called the Relova kurgan. All these kurgans were excavated by Svetlana Ivanova in the early 21st century, by the way. And the third group is the Usatova culture. Usatova is characterized by kurgans. Whether we have the right dates for these kurgans is not entirely clear. And the problem comes from a difference in radiocarbon dates that come from Usatova pottery versus human remains. And so the traditional Usatova chronology based on topology, relative pottery analysis, and coming from archaeological investigations and supported again by carbon dates and pottery, places the culture at about 3400 to 2900 BC. Some extended to past 2900, but many, like Professor Manzoura, for example, things that the culture only lasted about a couple of hundred years. Now, when you look at the C14 data coming from human remains, they moved the date up almost 1,000 years. So the difference between dates from human remains of Usatova and the pottery is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 years, which cannot be. Obviously, there's something wrong here. And the main issue is that human bones are aged because of human diet. So it is aquatic diet that Usatova people most likely practiced, be that freshwater fish or brackish or salt water, contains old carbon, and this old carbon ages human remains, and you have to calibrate it according to whatever scale you can come up with. Usually, you need contemporary fauna to calibrate it against, but we don't have that. We only have one cow published in terms of stable isotopes from the Mayaki site of Usatova, which is what is shown here on this map. And I have several publications and a couple in the works where I suggest different scales to use, different adjustments to use to bring the dates from human bones closer to the dates on pottery, but it's not always possible. We still have a gap that needs to be we need to think what it means. So let's get into closer to genetics. The site of the Kurgan Suvorova group, and again, Suvorova, we consider this in extent one of the subgroups of Sredny Stig, the early part of Sredny Stig, perhaps the elite of Sredny Stig. We're still not clear as to exactly what these as to what people represent, but we do know based on their burial traditions that they were well off in terms of their status, whether it's their own society or their status in the societies of the surrounding area. The necropolis of Girgulasti is one of the most striking examples of displaying the status symbols in burials. There, again, there's a kurgan on top of this necropolis, and there are 5 burials associated with it: 2 adults and 3 children. One of the adults is buried away from the group. In general, Professor Manzoura divides the burial sites of the Suvorova culture into 2 categories. One that contains burials with bracelets, and another one that contains burials with scepters, symbols of power, or at least that's how we interpret them today. So the Girgulasti site belongs to the bracelet type burial. So the children and adults display an amazing quantity and quality of personal adornments, from bracelets to weaponry that has not ever been seen before or since in the area, such as associated with burial number 4 of a young male of 20 to 25 years of age, who was placed on the bed of river silt. This is the top part of the grave, the catacomb grave, that's over 5 meters into the ground. And this individual was buried with a composite sword, the spear, and the rod, like a shaft that's shown here in the picture. That's also a composite with metal inlays made of gold. I'm not going to go through the archaeology of it. It's well represented in a number of publications. So I'm just going to dive right into the genetics part of it. So this is now where my expertise lies. And I work with different groups of archaeogeneticists who mostly into this genome-wide analysis, which is the most comprehensive and the most telling. But my specialty is mitochondrial DNA, and even though my colleagues play the value of mitochondrial analysis down, well, in comparison to the whole genome, it's obviously not as revealing, but it does have its place in archaeogenetics. For more than 40 years, we've been accumulating data on the distribution of mitochondrial lineages, and I'm still convinced that mitochondrial DNA is an ideal marker for molecular and population diversity analysis. It's clonally inherited. It has neutral or near neutral molecular evolution. It has a concentrative accumulation of errors, mutations that allow us to calibrate the molecular clock by which we can measure the time from branching off of various sublineages of mitochondrial DNA. And so I'm going to focus on that in my presentation, partly because some of this is already published, and because I'm directly involved in producing the data, whereas at the genome-wide level, I get the data from other groups. So as a preview, at the whole genome level, Girgulasti, the 2 individuals from Girgulasti Cemetery, burial 3, child, and burial 4, young adult, are positioned within the steppe genetic ancestry continuum. So this is not surprising, because that's expected. Sredny is expected to show this Western steppe herder ancestry, WSH. And their mitochondrial lineages are likely local, Balkan local. So they frequent in the Mesolithic Iron Gates area, at least for the child's lineage, and the other lineage of the young adult male is originally ultimately from Anatolia, but it has also been found in the Iron Gates area. So it's locally derived one way or another, either through the descendants of Anatolian farmers in Europe in the Neolithic, or even earlier from the Mesolithic Iron Gates area, which is not all that expected, because you'd think that if the Sredny Steppe comes from eastern part of Ukraine, then we should be seeing more of that genetic ancestry associated with them. But the maternal lineages of these individuals are likely local. Now, when it comes to the Desea cemetery in Romania, we have one big surprise. Well, it depends who you ask. The local archaeologists always assumed that the Desea cemetery represented a local culture, even designated the Desea group as a separate culture. But to geneticists like me, this is a surprise. One of the 19 burials at the Desea cemetery, which is a Suvorova cemetery by the artifacts and by the burial position, but everything archaeological about the cemetery makes it look like a Suvorova cemetery. It's a scepter. The cemeteries are their symbols of power associated with Suvorova group that are found in this cemetery. So everything about this cemetery, from an archaeological standpoint, says Suvorova. But genetically speaking, this individual here, the burial number 10, genetically is local European farmer, Balkan European farmer, a descendant of Anatolian farmers in the early Neolithic, which is unexpected. Again, it's not something that when you look at the cemetery, you look how these people are buried. It wouldn't be the first thing that will come to your mind that these are local farmers that took on a cultural identity of an outside culture, and this is what appears to be the case in this cemetery, and it obviously poses questions about what made these people do this. The cultural diffusion from Sredny Steppe into the Balkan farming area might not have necessarily been all that peaceful. So perhaps Gimbutas was correct, and Anthony, about the kind of submission of the Balkan Eneolithic by the people from the steppes. Well, that is up to archaeologists to figure out. I'm just giving you ideas to work with. There are other interesting links, genetic links between the Gurgulesti cemetery and the whole Suvorova area, and also it spills over into other areas, such as the child burial number 3, has the same mitochondrial lineage as a post-transition, or maybe the date here is, well, it's accurate enough, but it probably needs to be at some point redone to get it a little bit less to reduce the error, in any case, to figure out exactly where this burial is placed in terms of carbon dating. But the dates are quite similar. So 43 to 4100 for Gurgulesti, 42 to 3900 for this other burial. We don't associate it with Suvorova culture exactly, but it's from the same area where Sredny, the Neolithic part of the Sredny Steppe continuum existed at that time period. So the individuals from the same gene pool, certainly. It's the main burial, actually burial 15, not 1, on the Azov coast. This is under kurgan burial, but likely was a ground burial, and kurgan came later. We're not sure, but either way, the child from the Northwest Pontic and this individual from the Neolithic part of the Suvorov-Neolithic continuum shared the same mitochondrial DNA. At the genome-wide level, well, we're still working on that, so we don't know, but it would be interesting to see what these individuals are going to look like. The burial 4, the male with amazing weaponry, has the same mitochondrial lineage as a Xongrid individual from Hungary. This single burial, ground burial, discovered in Hungary, of the Suvorov type, which is probably the westernmost burial of this culture. Again, and ends up sharing the same mitochondrial lineage with the Western burial. At the genome-wide level, the Xongrid individual is even more fascinating, but I don't have the permission to talk about that yet. So we'll just have to wait till the end of the year to read about it when this study is published. But it's going to be quite a fascinating revelation. There are other links, genetic links, between these individuals and other Eneolithic individuals living in the steppe, and I will talk about that a little later in the presentation. So the other group that I was going to talk about is Usatova. Here on this picture, I have 3 kurgans at the Mayaki site of the Usatova culture in the Odessa region. There's still a debate of whether these are really kurgans, but archaeologically they do seem to represent kurgans, even though there are no hills on top of them. The kurgan number 7 seems to be erected in the area of natural hill, small hill. But again, there are no visible ground mounds on top of any of these kurgans, except for probably kurgan number 1, the biggest one in the area. There are about 10 kurgans that are recognized at Mayaki. Mayaki has a necropolis and a ritual site associated with it, and there's some burials at the ritual site as well, but they're not so far. Well, for the ones that we have, do not seem to be associated with Usatova. The kurgan burials at the necropolis site are associated genetically with Usatova culture, except here's the thing, here's the problem that I started talking about a few minutes earlier. The dates from human bones that we have from these kurgans, particularly from these oldest ones, so it's a kurgan 8, 7, and 9. The first 2 are the oldest kurgans in the cemetery, based on dates from human remains from these burial plots. The oldest one is kurgan 7, burial 2, right here. It's off-centered, and the burial in the century is not Usatova, so it also creates questions. But again, we'll focus on other things for the time being. Even with a reservoir effect adjustment, and it's about, well, it's a huge adjustment, 700 years. It's still, that burial still dates to the early 4th millennium. And this is the best I can do. I'm using kind of an adjustment scale that takes into account individual values of ratios of 15 and nitrogen. But still, even with everything being considered in terms of radiocarbon offset, these are very early burials. It's very difficult to link them to Usatova culture chronologically. But the thing about it is that genetically, they what Nick Patterson, who did the genetic analysis, he calls them the Usatava core genetically. So not the seven, the burial 2 in Kurgan 7, but in Kurgan 8, 2 burials coming from that Kurgan are in this Usatava core, and they date not much younger than burial 2 of Kurgan 7. So there are 2 individuals buried in the 2 skeletons in burial 6 of right here, Kurgan 8. And the male of the 2, the male and the female. The male dates to 39 to 3700 BCE. Again, if we think of it in terms of Usatava culture, we're at least 300 years away. But genetically, it's already Usatava. So what does Patterson mean by the Usatava core? What he found was that the genetic ancestry of Usatava individuals seemed to be consistent with sort of a dual ancestry, one coming from the Western steppe herders, and another one coming from early European Neolithic farmers, of which Tripelia is part of. And so it is likely, Nick is still working on the genetic analysis, but it's likely that the farmer genetic ancestry in Usatava, in fact, comes from Tripelia. And so Tripelia does play a role in all these activities during the Neolithic in the steppe, one way or another, genetically, culturally, both. But in this case, we will see both. We see the cultural aspects of Tripelian presence as well as genetic. There's a third component of the genetic ancestry that doesn't show up in all of the Usatava burials, but it does in some. And this component comes from the Caucasus. So none of this is surprising to archaeologists. Archaeologists obviously thought of Tripelia as being one of the components of the ancestry of Usatava, as well as their links with the Caucasus. But again, we are verifying this genetically. We're seeing that is in fact what's going on at the genetic level. What also should mention that as far as the genetic ancestry formation being predating the culture, it also outlasts the culture quite a bit. There's a burial in Moldova. I think it is associated with Usatava. That is also part of this genetic Usatava core. It dates to 25 to 2300 BCE. So it's the second part of the 3rd millennium. And it's if we take that into account, the ancestry of Usatava will last for over 1,000 years. The culture itself probably doesn't last that long. And that's an interesting observation that it's not the first time it's been made in the Pontic area, but it's something that we need to take into consideration. There was another kurgan that I showed on one of the previous slides called the Revova kurgan, which is part of the chain of kurgans excavated by Svetlana Ivanova in the early 21st century, that archaeologists could not associate with a specific culture. The main burial in the kurgan is Eneolithic, and the kurgan was erected on top of this burial. That's archaeologists are certain about that. The burial itself doesn't have any cultural artifacts associated with it. It's disarticulated, so it's really hard to pinpoint cultural affiliation. When we did the genetic analysis, the affiliation became very clear. This individual, the main burial in this kurgan, dated to 3800 to about 3650, genetically is Usatava. And in Usatava, it's not in the core, but it's in the continuum, in the genetic sort of extended genetic ancestry of Usatava individuals. It's not homogeneous. The core is relatively homogeneous, but there are other well, we'll call it a cline, basically genetic cline. But so this individual is on the cline, but it's close to the core genetically. And the date is, again, if you look at the date, and there's no reservoir effect here that I can tell, but the date is still before the conventional side of a dating. Maybe the right end is about at the beginning of conventional side of a chronology, but still it's a little earlier than conventionally thought. There's individuals, mitochondrial lineage share goes all across the Pontic area, in fact, across the entire steppe area, all the way into Western Altai. The mitochondrial match for this individual is found in the Afanassieva culture in Western Altai, as well as Yamna from Moldova and catacombed individual from the North Caucasus. And this individual does show certain genetic affiliations with the Caucasus area, and the steppe Maikop to be exact, but that also needs to be further investigated. So on to the third and the last group that I wanted to talk about, the two Katarzyna kurgans, the one that gave the name of the Katarzyna type, this post-Steed group, post-transition period group in the Northwest Pontic. This individual is a main burial, Eneolithic main burial in the Kurgan. It's dated to 3965 to 3783 BCE. I am not entirely certain that there is no reservoir effect here involved, but it's very difficult to calculate. Well, in the absence of contemporary fauna, it's near impossible to be precise. But we don't have even a general sort of estimate of the reservoir effect in the area, apart from Mayaki. But again, it's very limited in terms of how much what we can do with that adjustment. The diet isotopes of this individual are very similar to diet isotopes of individuals of a later time, 34 to 3300 BCE, from the Western Caspian area, the Manich steppe. There is a cemetery there called charcoal soon. So some of the individuals of charcoal soon display the same dietary isotope ratios as this individual in burial 10 of kurgan 1. This particular individual is very difficult to work with genetically. It failed all attempts to extract nuclear DNA and Y chromosome. We assume it's a male. But I was recently able to get his mitochondrial lineage during haplogroup U4. And U4 is the main sort of haplogroup, the dominant haplogroup of the North Pontic area. It has been present in the area since the early Holocene. And many, if not most, of the Northwest Pontic burials of the Eneolithic time are characterized by various sublineages of U4, including two other individuals from the same kurgan. We always wanted to do this experiment, study, where we take a bunch of stratified kurgans and examine their genetic affiliations to see if perhaps kurgans represent family burials, among other possibilities. Well, we failed so far with the North Pontic kurgans because of preservation problems. So this kurgan is the one that we do have more than two individuals from the same kurgan. Two of the three are, they belong to the Yamna period, and they're separated by about 400 years. The earliest one dates to about 3000 BCE, and the other one is about, again, 400 years later. Now, these two individuals share both the mitochondrial lineages and the Y chromosome that's inherited from father to all the sons. They are identical. Both unipaternal lineages are identical in these two individuals, separated by 400 years. And the mitochondrial lineage is from the U4 group, it's the sublineage of U4. So based on, the little evidence we have right now, it does seem to be possible that at least some of the kurgans in the Northwest Pontic are, in fact, associated with same family group. But that, again, that remains to be seen. And that's the same for other kurgans. And again, it's been difficult because of the preservation issues to get good data from kurgan DNA in this area. Kurgan number 2 is a little younger. It belongs to this time period, well, the Eneolithic burial, the main burial, falls in 3300 to 3000 BCE. So this is the time when Yamna culture starts to dominate the area. The individual buried in Kurgan 2, the main burial, does have links on the maternal lineage, the mitochondrial DNA lineage part, with the Yamna group. The one Yamna individual that has the same mitochondrial lineage as this individual, Kurgan 2, main burial, comes from the Yampil area in the middle of Dniester, at the site Pridnestranska, Kurgan 4. The main burial in the Kurgan is from the late Tripilia, or dynastic culture, also associated with Zhivotylivka group. And so this Yamna burial, whose mitochondrial DNA matches the Kurgan 2 main burial, is located just on the outside of on the border of that main Zhivotylivka burial. It's dated to, well, quite later than Kurgan 2 burial 1, but again, there is mitochondrial lineage sharing that is evident here between the two groups. The conclusion that I can make from this is that during the Neolithic, there was, while we see a lot of this diverse array of cultures, they all seem to be sharing cultural ideas as well as genetics. We do not yet have the entire picture from the mitochondrial level. It's a lot clearer than from the nuclear level, but it does seem that all these different cultures end up having a lot more in common than we originally thought. There's one more, I think I'm getting close to be out of time, one more evidence to this lineage sharing. At the site of Mayaki, there is a burial of the sanctuary, part of the site, so away from the necropolis. This is an early Neolithic burial. In fact, if we don't adjust the dates, keeping in mind radiocarbon, reservoir effect offset, it would date to the late Neolithic. We're not sure exactly what culture this individual represents, because there were no cultural artifacts, but the mitochondrial lineage of this individual is the same as what we see in the post-transition period Sredny Stig in the middle Dnipro Valley. There's one that comes from the Deryivka site, the Deryivka culture of Sredny Stig, and another comes from an individual who was buried at a Tripilian site near Kiev, the site of Kolomytsev Yar tract. So this is a Sredny Stig genetically individual that appears at a Tripilian site. And so these two Sredny Stig individuals from Deryivka and Kolomytsev Yar and in the Eneolithic burial at Mayaki share the same mitochondrial DNA, which to me is fascinating. So the whole genetic sharing goes further back than we might have originally thought, and it lasted for quite a while. And we also see that the Sredny Stig's influence on local cultures is a little bit more extensive than we originally thought. And overall, if we were to go back to the original question of whether the burials of first builders of kurgans in the steppe have anything to do with the Yamna culture genetically? The answer is probably yes. If you ask me, this is my personal opinion, by the way, it might not be the opinion of the group who's been studying the Yamna origins, but to me, there is a reciprocal relationship between Trypillia and Sredny Steppe that's been going on for probably a millennia, give or take. And so if we consider Yamna to be the extension of steppe ancestry from the Eneolithic into the early Bronze Age, I'm convinced that another part of the Yamna ancestry comes from Trypillia. Whether or not this is the case, Nick Patterson and Joseph Lazaridis and David Wright will tell us all about it pretty soon, hopefully by the end of the year. But I think my time is up. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it was informative, and I'm ready to take some of your questions. I'm going to stop screen sharing right now. Thank you for your time.